Good evening, and welcome to our top story. In breaking news that will surprise absolutely no one, your security job may not be worth the headaches. Stay tuned as we dive into the top signs that it might be time to call it quits. You know you should quit your security guard job when your post orders feel like ancient legends, passed down from guard to guard but never actually written down. Imagine showing up at a new site expecting clear written orders, only to find out everything is communicated by word of mouth. So you ask a fellow guard about your duties and they say, "Oh yeah, someone told me what to do when I started, but I kind of figured it out as I went." This isn't a game of telephone, it's your job. No one should have to rely on half-remembered instructions to keep a site secure. Lack of documentation not only makes your job harder, but also makes it impossible to perform it properly. You end up doing tasks outside your scope because someone else did it. Or worse, you miss critical steps because no one bothered to tell you. This inconsistency is dangerous, and it shows a fundamental lack of care from the employer. You're left in the dark, which means any mistakes fall on you, not management. They say our post orders are written down somewhere, probably in a binder labeled post orders, printed on ancient browned paper and buried in the last dusty box at the bottom of a stack of dusty boxes in the closet of the manager's office. But nobody can be sure. No one dares search the tomb of ops manager, for though great power awaits those who possess the post orders, great peril also awaits them. And so, the orders remain hidden, passed around by word of mouth, like some mythical treasure map no one can actually find. Here's a classic. Management expects you to arrange your own shift coverage, because apparently that's not their job anymore. It's yours. Scheduling and shift coverage, that's supposed to be management's job, not yours. But in a bad security job, you might find yourself hunting down replacements whenever you need time off. Imagine putting in a PTO request weeks in advance, only to be told you need to find someone to cover that shift. It's absurd. You end up on your phone, texting other guards, practically begging them to cover for you. And if no one can, tough luck, you're left without a break. This turns your personal time into another source of stress, leaving you feeling like management has offloaded their responsibility directly onto you. Scheduling coverage isn't your responsibility, it's management's. They're the ones who should know every guard's availability, their willingness to work overtime, and ideally have floater guards on standby for exactly this reason. You, on the other hand, don't have access to any of this info, so you're left flying blind. And let's face it, a request for coverage from a fellow guard just doesn't carry the same weight as one from a supervisor or manager who can actually compel someone to take on the shift. When management leaves you scrambling to cover your own shifts, it's more than just frustrating. It's a clear sign they don't value your time. If they're dropping the ball on this basic responsibility, it's time to find a job where you're actually supported. Ever had a paycheck that doesn't quite add up? Missing hours, or worse, an entire check that just vanished? There's nothing worse than putting in a full week's work only to find hours missing on your paycheck. And in a bad security job, this happens more often than you'd think. You might work a double shift, only for half of those hours to mysteriously disappear. Or worse, the paycheck doesn't come at all. Suddenly, you're spending time on calls, chasing down payroll, when you should be able to count on your wages showing up on time. It's frustrating, it's disrespectful, and it makes you feel like the company doesn't value your time or effort. If they're constantly forgetting to pay you correctly, it's a clear sign they don't care about you or the job you do. And then there's when they start playing games to avoid paying you overtime. I remember one site where we were paid weekly. After putting in 8 extra hours total on Friday and Saturday nights for scheduled parties, my account manager called me up Saturday night and told me to take Sunday off because he had a rover covering the shift on straight time. Just like that, my overtime was erased, all so they could avoid paying up. I was livid and should have left right then and there, but I was young and desperate. When they're constantly losing hours or even going out of their way to deny you your overtime, they're sending a message loud and clear. Your time and effort don't matter. If you're running into these kinds of payroll games regularly, it's time to rethink whether the job is worth sticking around for. You know you're in a bad spot when you're told to guard a construction site with zero protective gear and you're one dropped 2x4 away from a trip to the ER, or worse, the morgue. A responsible company makes safety a priority, but if you're in a bad security job, you'll often find yourself in unsafe environments with no protective equipment. Imagine being told to guard a construction zone without basic safety gear. No goggles, no ear protection, no hard hat. You're standing in a dusty area surrounded by power tools, flying debris, and construction workers, and the thought crosses your mind. If anything happens, there's nothing protecting you. These companies don't see you as a person, they see you as a body to fill space, and they'll risk your safety if it saves them a few bucks. OSHA guidelines exist for a reason, and when a company disregards them, it's your well-being on the line. Legally, you're allowed to refuse any assignment that puts your safety at risk if you're not provided with proper protection. But good luck making that complaint. It's an ordeal to get an OSHA representative out to your site to hear your case. I was once told to guard a construction area without so much as a hard hat, goggles, or ear protection. I refused to patrol the site and stayed in an enclosed, protected area where I could still keep an eye on things without risking my life. A dropped 2x4 or loose nail could have been the end of me, and I wasn't about to take that chance. When a company treats you like a disposable body, willing to put your safety at risk to save a few bucks, it's time to get out. Your health and safety are worth more than any job that can't even provide basic protection. If you're ready to stop having your time, labor, and livelihood abused, check out my Etsy and Beacons pages for my guide on passing the armed guard exam to make your exit from low-paying, unarmed work and level up to a better security job. Links in the description. If you're using your personal phone to organize post duties because management doesn't even know what half the posts actually do, you're in for a rough time. Good management should know the layout and responsibilities of every post and communicate effectively, but when you're at a poorly managed site, you might find that guards are left to coordinate amongst themselves. Management doesn't understand the specific duties at each post, so you end up relying on your fellow guards to figure things out. It's common to find yourself in a group chat, using your own phone to talk about how to handle shifts and specific responsibilities. This lack of oversight disrupts your workflow and forces guards to shoulder the planning that management should be handling. Instead of security professionals, you're treated like fixers for a site that runs itself only because guards fill in the gaps left by management. At one site I worked, we had a protocol to close the front gate at 5 p.m. to prevent any random people from wandering onto the property, whether by accident or with ill intentions. One day, the client's security director dropped by after hours and noticed the gate was closed. He went off on me and my partner, ranting about how we'd closed it too early. This guy barely showed up on site, maybe once every 6 months if we were lucky, and yet here he was, dressing us down over a protocol he didn't even understand. We didn't close it early just for kicks. We knew it kept the site secure. Most employees on the second shift were already on site by 5, and if anyone arrived later, they had an access code. We dealt with drunk wanderers finding their way onto the property before, and it had become our job to herd them out. Closing the gate at 5 was a simple measure to prevent these incidents, but of course the big boss shows up and assumes we're doing something wrong. If you're at a site where management doesn't understand, communicate, or respect the roles they're supposedly overseeing, it's a recipe for frustration and burnout. When supervisors are disconnected from the realities of the job and won't back you up, it's a clear sign that they're not worth working for. Here's a gem. Former guards who've fallen out with the company but have an in with the client, getting their job back at someone else's expense. Favoritism and nepotism are ugly realities in bad security jobs. You can show up every day, work hard, and do your job well, only to see someone with connections push their way back into a position that should have been earned. Say there's a former guard who left under bad terms, but they happen to know someone important on the client's side. Next thing you know, the client wants their favorite guard back. So management makes up an excuse, gets rid of the current, loyal guard, and brings in the former one just to keep the client happy. It's unprofessional, disheartening, and disrespectful to everyone on site who actually puts in the work. When a company allows this, they're essentially saying personal favors are more important than professionalism. And the worst part? After they jumped through hoops to reinstate this pet guard, he didn't even stay. He found a different job about 8 months later and left again, leaving them high and dry. So they kicked out a dedicated guard to get Old Faithful back, only for him to leave them hanging. We all knew exactly why the original guard was let go, but of course everyone just played along with the official story. It was foul, and it showed everyone that loyalty meant nothing compared to a client's whim. When favoritism and backdoor deals take priority over hard work and consistency, it creates a toxic work environment. If you're at a place where connections trump competence, then it's time to find a job where your efforts are actually valued. You know you're stuck in a dead-end job when every promise of a raise or site transfer feels like a carrot on a stick, always just out of reach. It's a classic move. Management swears a raise is coming soon. Just wait it out, they say. The next contract renewal will bring that raise we've all been waiting for. They'll tell you that your supervisor heard it from the account manager, who heard it from the operations manager, who supposedly heard it from the client. But when that contract finally does come up for renewal, whether it's every year, 3 years, or even 5 years, what happens? Nothing. No raise, no follow-through. It's clear at this point that they're lying, stringing you along to keep you in place without actually valuing your work. Think about it. These contract negotiations are between two parties who don't have your best interest at heart. On one side, there's the client, who likely sees you as nothing more than an insurance discount, just a cost-saving measure that lets them get a better rate. Then on the other side, there's the contractor, your security company. Now, if your wages go up, it's because they've increased their rate, and even then, they're probably pocketing a good portion of it. They don't want to push for a higher rate because they're afraid it'll scare the client into the arms of a cheaper, bottom-tier company. To them, a client in the hand is worth 2 in the bush, so they'll keep everything status quo. You're left waiting for a raise that's never going to come. I dealt with this for 8 years at one job. I was promised a raise countless times, but it never happened. Eventually, I left for a different full-time job and only worked on call for them occasionally. And wouldn't you know it, the raise finally came, but only after I'd already moved on. And even then, it was far below what was necessary to keep up with the cost of living. After waiting years for something that turned out to be meaningless, I realized it just wasn't worth it. Here's an example of how spineless some supervisors can be. When I once tried pushing for a raise, my supervisor did go to the client on my behalf. But the client claimed it wouldn't be fair to give me a raise without giving one to every other guard on the site. Rather than advocating for everyone, pushing for the raise we all deserved, my supervisor just shrank back and agreed with her. I liked Frank, but for God's sake, grow a backbone. If you're in a job where raises and transfers are dangled like carrots on a stick, it's time to face the facts. Those promises are empty. Don't waste years waiting for them to come through. Know your worth, and if they won't give you what you deserve, it's time to find a company that will. Like and subscribe for more guard guides, and be safe.